Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Riina Bray, and I am the founder of the Wild Earth Collaborative. Today, I am very happy to introduce you to Dr. Richard Mitchell. He is a full professor of child and youth studies at Brock University, and he will be talking to us for around 10 minutes about the work that he does, and we are so happy to have him today. Before I hand it over to Dr. Mitchell, I would like to say that the Wild Earth Collaborative is quite dedicated to providing a forum for children's voices. We have free youth membership, and we encourage children of all ages to come together and post their views, stories, poetry, artwork, anything that is related to their thoughts, feelings, views on the planet Earth and its well-being and their well-being consequently. WEC is there to help them come together as a unified voice and become a community, join together throughout Ontario to start, but hopefully further. So with that, I would like to introduce you again to Dr. Mitchell, and he will give us a bit more information about himself and tell us about his work.
Well, thank you, Riina, for inviting me today. It's always a blessing and a privilege to speak to you about children and their human rights and my area of research for decades now, which has been focused on the human rights of children, both now and into future generations. I've been a professor at Brock University in child and youth studies for about 20 years now. And before that, I worked with kids in British Columbia on the street, inpatient mental health facility, schools, foster care. So I've had a wide range of experiences of kids who have been harmed by adults, silenced by adults. And I've always been baffled by that. It's always mystified me how it is that in our best intentions, we can live in a world where so many children are being hurt and silenced. At any rate, as I teach here in our Child and Youth Studies department and in my own research, I'm interested in kids' experiences locally and nationally and globally, and that those interests have drawn me to United Nations summits in New York and Geneva on occasion. I've attended in 2019 one of the UN talk fests they call Conference of the Parties. It was COP19, and these are places where they go and talk about the climate but do nothing about the climate. Those meetings are infested with oil and gas people from everywhere on the planet to try and nullify any action that these meetings and these groups can come up with. And I'll just pass it back to you by briefly mentioning when I was in Madrid, I marched through the streets with 500,000 children, young people, and their families behind this young Swedish teenager. At that point, she was still about 15, Greta Thunberg, who decided on her own to stop going to school every Friday some years ago. And Greta and her peers, one of them from Manitoulin Island, a young woman named Autumn Pelche, a neighbor of ours here in Ontario, they organized a huge protest at those meetings and were at the head of this 4-hour march, peaceful march through the streets of Madrid. There wasn't a cop, there wasn't a soldier, there wasn't a chopper. It was one of those kinds of life-changing events that, I welcome everyone that hears this to try and find. Children are speaking up and speaking out, and we need to hear them.
Wow, that's amazing. And what's happening these days with children, say, even in Ontario? Are we doing anything? Is there policy in place?
What's fascinating to me as I watch this summer of wildfires, and there's something like 40 million acres that have been burnt. Now, when I went to a session in New York at the General Assembly, this is some time ago, 2007, I heard the term climate refugees for the first time, and I became appalled thinking about global South nations in various places having to deal with climate change. This very summer, we have climate refugees in British Columbia, in the Northwest Territories, out in the East Coast. And the shock and trauma that's being passed on to the children and young people of those communities will be intergenerational. What are we doing to hear those children? Absolutely zero. Looking at the media this week, in one of the biggest political scandals of history in this country, is talking about Justin Trudeau's hair and socks and divorce. And so, how to enfranchise not only the students that come to me who are going to be teachers, social workers, probation officers, counselors of children. That's who I work with now and who I talk to and pass on critical thinking tools. But how do they convey those critical thinking tools to children and young people to become active politically? Somehow we've allowed the political class in the country to rule over us with impunity.
Yeah, I hear you. It's really alarming, and I'm so glad that you're doing this work because it is so vitally important. Yeah, trying to get the children to come together, to have a voice. 1/3 of the planet is actually children. And for us not to have them represented properly or to have a platform for them is just absolutely ludicrous. You know, raising my own children and teaching them all about animals and plants every day. That was the bread and butter of what they had to learn. We didn't teach them about effluent and, toxins in their food, right? So I'm just wondering, what do you think would be, I don't know, next steps in terms of trying to improve the situation? Because it really needs ideas, it needs leadership, and you seem to be poised in the right spot now. So would you mind telling us a little bit about what your thoughts are? Some blue sky?
Well, today would be, I don't know what week, maybe 250th week of the Fridays for the climate school strikes all over the planet. I was involved in one in Queen's Park with about 10,000 people, and this is going back again to pre-COVID, 2019. And in that occasion, in 2019, it was a Friday, mid-September, and there were thousands of young people as young as 5 and with their families and mentors up to 18. And in that occasion, there were police and helicopters right here in Ontario. So I can tell you that the demonization and pathologizing of children and young people and outing them is, again, a really serious prevalence in this country. What I would do and what I encourage my students to do is get kids involved in political action. And they don't have to sit down and strike or be out in the streets risking safety. They can find out who their MPs are, who their MPPs are, how they vote in the House. These are active measures that are actually contributing to the collapse of the climate all over. And somehow we've disconnected ourselves, as well as our children and families, from that political process. We've ceased exercising appropriate political authority. We, the people, as it says in the American Constitution, or here in Canada, we've disenfranchised ourselves by not participating and asking our children and informing our children and young people how to actively participate. Letter writing in local campaigns, finding out who the First Nations people are, how many elders in First Nations communities are actively, doing things to support a healthy environment. I'll pass it back to you because
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I'm taking notes furiously. No, that's amazing. we've developed a curriculum for grades 6 to 11 on environmental health that we like to put into the school system. I need to reach out to the MPs and MPPs. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could just, with your leadership, start getting people together to start somehow or other organizing themselves? Clearly, like, I'm very excited about where we're going, because this is an area that desperately needs mentoring, leadership, instruction as to how to proceed. It's critically important, and it's so great to have you talking to us today. In closing, I just want, before we pass it over to you for the final say, I wanted to let the audience know that we would be so happy if you could come and speak again regularly with us and give us an update and tell us some more information that we would need, because I know that the listeners are there are a lot of parents out there listening and really would like to get on board and make a difference. So would love to have you regularly giving us updates and mentorship. That would be fantastic. So Richard, in closing, do you have any other thoughts, or I'm sure you have a million thoughts, but anything else you want to tell people today as a starter that they should, any take-home messages or any of your personal thoughts on this?
Sure. Two things come to mind quickly. A young woman named Autumn Pelche, who was identified by her grannies, aunties, and mom very early, almost in diapers, as a powerful ancestral voice for water here in Ontario and Manitoulin Island. She's approached Prime Minister Trudeau many years ago and compelled him to act to clean up the water on reserves in Canada. She was 13 that day. Young people are taking the lead in ways that we're not noticing or not being reported. So I would bring to our listeners' attention, Autumn's work. She's ongoing and active locally, nationally, and internationally. And the last thing I'd point out and bring to your listeners' attention is a UN report from last summer on Canada. It's called the Concluding Observations on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's like an audit, a child rights report card that occurs about every 10 years. And in that report from June 2022, last year, there were lots of discussions about areas where we could support children and young people environmentally, politically, socially, and in other ways. So those two elements. The big picture, these UN reports that point out to Canadians how to support kids, and then an individual, a young woman like Autumn and her peers.
Perfect. That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Mitchell, and we will hopefully see you soon for some more inspiration to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye
Bye for now.